Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really, really pleased to be chairing this session on resilience and bounce back ability. And the question is, what's it really like being an entrepreneur and having to dig deep? And I'm really pleased to have this amazing panel because we know, because of Charlie and Nick just now, that we celebrate entrepreneurship for driving innovation and change. But the path is hard and they suffer a lot of setbacks. And innovators don't just have vision and passion, but they're also resilient. And they survive failure and bad luck because they're continuously adapting, learning, and pushing forward no matter what. But how do they do it? So we have a distinguished panel today who's going to share their valuable insights and personal stories about navigating the turbulent journey of entrepreneurship. So our panel includes, I'm going to go from the far side, Ghadimi, who is a serial entrepreneur and who has created Bowimi. It's a CRM and route planner for field sales in the drinks industry. And Laura Aiken, who runs Thrive Leadership. She was originally a recovering chemical engineer, is that right? For the energy sector, and is now running her own business and brings her knowledge of growing teams to build resilient teams through executive coaching and is a specialist in resilience. And a specialist. And Cherie-Anne Baxter-Blyth is part owner and marketing director of one of the largest privately owned financial advice businesses in the UK, Unividual. In a one-size-fits-all industry, she has created a trailblazer of a brand centred around inclusive advice with well-being first approach in what is a highly regulated and stressful, complex industry. So I thought I'd start by, so thank you for being here, and I just thought I'd start by asking you to just talk a little bit about yourself and your thoughts on resilience initially, and then I'll move on to questions. So Dan, would you like to start?
Of course, yeah. So I'm Dan. I run a small startup in Bath called Bowimi, and we are a field sales CRM for food and drink businesses. So we work with everyone from Oatly and Bacardi and those sorts of businesses down to the challenger brands and people getting their first stockists. So yeah, I've been doing that for about 6 years. Got an office in Bath, office in London. We're about 14, 15 people now. And yeah, it's going very well and excited to be here today.
Awesome. Maybe can everyone just take a deep breath and sort of, I don't know, shake out your shoulders, and we've been in front of a lot of screens today. Let's embody what we're talking about. My name's Laura, so yeah, as Thanh alluded to, I had a previous career in engineering that maybe through good experience and through bad inspired a bit of a obsession with stress and resilience. I'm on a mission to make the world a little less stressed, and I do that through leaders and businesses. The reason being twofold. The first is stress can have a catastrophic impact on our lives and our livelihoods. I was one of those people. And the second is, you know, we spend so much time in these places we call work or business, and they're pressure cookers of people and relationships and deadlines and stress. We're spending more time in businesses than we are in villages or communities, and that's our sort of new community. And I think it's a real conduit to wellness and thriving. So that's kind of my thoughts on the resilience piece. But yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. So part owner means I run Unividual alongside my brother and my dad. So that is quite a stressful situation for anyone who works in a financial, for a business, family-run business. Triggers happened every day because most of the stresses we have lead from childhood. So when you're sat there working with your dad, it's kind of like, yeah, interesting. So resilience is something that we've had to, bring quite deeply into our business. Financial services, for anyone who knows, is extremely stressful. sort of governed by the Financial Conduct Authority, and they're a bit like with a whip constantly attacking us. So we've had to create a business that centres around sort of making sure that clients and staff feel safe in the environment from a financial services point of view. And a big part of our purpose is building financial well-being among clients and reducing stress when it comes to managing your money, and that's really important to us. But to achieve that, we have to make sure we have a workforce that's diverse, that can contribute to the diversity that we have as a UK and service lots of different clients, and they're young. You know, in our industry, the average advisor is about 50 years old, and they're going to retire in about 2 years. So we're going to be left looking after everybody, and there's very few of us who have an average advisor age of 30 and below. And when you get young people coupled with extremely stressful, highly regulated environment where a wrong turn can affect someone's financial situation, that means you have to create an environment where how do people make mistakes and learn from those mistakes without it having an impact on clients. So we've done a lot of work around psychological safety and how we embed youth with that environment.
Thank you. Thanks. So I've got a list of questions, and I think I might start with Dan. I know when we spoke that you've started a few things, you've pivoted and things like that. So I guess the question is, as an entrepreneur, what drives you to keep persisting when you are faced with difficult challenges? What keeps you going?
Yeah, so I got fired, and within like a month or two, I started a nightlife app. And
I don't know why we're all laughing.
yeah, and the thing is, when I got fired, I had so much like hate, like that I just carried, and so much sort of like, I'm going to show you, like I'm going to really show you that I'm worth something. So I think, you know, when that happens and you think like you're trying to prove yourself almost to someone who really just doesn't care. Like, I mean, it's not personal, but like you don't know that at the time. You sort of figure that out as you sort of just navigate life. But it sort of pushes you to try and prove something to someone who really isn't that bothered. But I think everyone sort of has something like that, whether it's like a parent or whether it's an ex-boss or an ex-partner, where they have someone who they're just really just desperate to prove something to, and, you know, really desperate to show that they're not a failure, and just sort of will push through anything to do that. So the more insecurity people often have, the more that can drive them to overcome whatever challenges they have. So yeah, that's where it came from for me.
I wasn't expecting to say that. I thought it would come across as really chilled. What about you, Laura? What drives you to keep going?
Well, maybe
Challenges?
just to pull on Dan's point a little bit on different models or scales that you'll see on burnout. Often the first step is a desire to prove yourself or an over-ambition. And I think a lot of people in this room have that, whether it's sort of an internally oriented ambition or externally oriented ambition. I'll show you. You know, we're all already on step one. So people in the entrepreneurial space, people in the small business world or large business world, I feel like we can be a little bit more at risk because we're so driven by that desire that sometimes we can overlook ourselves, and we can overlook the boundaries that we need to have in place to look after ourselves. So really what drives me is actually completely the opposite. I've been in a place where I was stressed out, burnt out, underappreciated, overworked, and what drives me now is a desire to have quality of life.
And can I...
Same again.
Quality, same
Yeah.
again. What drives you?
I love what I do. I think that's really important. You have to have passion for what you're actually doing. If you're running a business and you lose that passion, it becomes really challenging. I think what drives me has changed over the years. So, you know, one of the reasons why I sort of like wanted to work really hard at an early age is because you want a big house and a nice car, and you want people to kind of see you. and think, oh, that person's successful. But I realised that that came from a place of a lack of confidence and wanting to prove, I suppose, in a way that my dad raised me to be, you know, the protege, and I want to live up to that. But that's changed a lot recently, and I think things that drive me now are more around enjoying what I do, being healthy. I think as you get older, you kind of realise what's really important in life, and that's the network around you, the people around you, and that's what then fuels the resilience. So it's like a cycle, essentially.
Does that make a difference in a sort of family type of business as well? Like, is there a driver that comes from, you know, turning up for the family? And,
definitely. I think when I was at my previous business, although I was a shareholder, it wasn't a family business, and I'd been there nearly 10 years as well. But I left that for, you know, giving back to my family, because I thought if I can help my family get Unividual to where we want it to be, we will benefit as a collective family from that, and then everyone that's part of the Unividual wider family will benefit from that too. So I think family businesses tend to leak out a lot of their values and their culture and their motivations into the wider business, and then all of those people become part of the family. And I've been at Unividual for 10 years this December, and a lot of the people I've worked with for over 5 years, some of them for 10 years, and, you know, they're like brothers and sisters to you because they've been there the whole way, or that every step of the journey.
And that makes a big difference.
Definitely, and that's what makes you get out of bed in the morning.
So, actually, I'm going to ask Laura first. Just how do you, given that things do go wrong, and, you know, there are stresses and challenges, how do you help leaders manage their stress and maintain their mental well-being throughout, you know, when things do go wrong? How do you do that?
Great question. I'll try and keep it brief.
You give all the tips, please, now.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I start with when I'm working with leaders is self-awareness on what stress looks like for them. Because it manifests very differently for different people. Some people feel it very physically. Some people have more of a sort of, you know, anxious thought pattern or spiraling thoughts. Some people get very sort of detached or disassociated. So the first step is always, you know, self-awareness. What does it look like for you? What does it feel like for you? And then start to get aware of what it looks like for your team as well, because different people will have, a different stress response. You can't change anything without first acknowledging, you know, what it is that needs to change and what that thing looks like. So first step is self-awareness. And then there's a range of regulation tools that help people, once they've identified that they're in a state of stress, to regulate back. And the toolkit that I use the most is kind of a neuroscience-based toolkit, so teaching people how to understand the brain's response to stress as a threat, and kind of harness that knowledge in order to, regulate stress when they notice it. But I think we'll get a bit into tools later, perhaps, so I won't take up as much time right now.
I was interested, for your younger team, is there a different approach for mental wellness?
Yeah.
How does that work when you're working with the? Is there we're in a sort of new intergenerational workplace at the moment, aren't we? With 6 generations or something, and in the workplace, I think we covered that today. And are you finding that you have to respond differently depending on their age in terms of how you respond to supporting a team?
Yeah, I think without wanting to generalise, but in terms of this subject, I think young people today need to be heard, and I think they're very misunderstood, and they can come across like quite demanding. But I really respect that. I really respect those demands, and they're wanting to change, you know, all these generations after them, the approach to how we work. And I think listening to them is really important. And I'm not a professional at doing that. I get that wrong still. But I think the key for us is to create a psychological safe environment. So what that looks like is anybody can come into the room and speak to anyone on the leadership team and have a cry, or, you know, a mental breakdown, or they might have an anxiety attack at work, and know who in the office suffers with anxiety and can support them with that. We have mental health first aiders in our office, and I think it's really important that as the older generation are running businesses, that they understand how to best support people, and you're not going to understand that until you help them realise what they need, which ties into what you were saying. Sometimes young people don't know enough of the theory because they're not further along down the line and don't know themselves enough to know what they need. So sometimes you have to just keep asking questions.
Not just the young ones.
Yeah, it takes a while, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go through a lot of psychological stress and trauma to understand how you react to that and then what you need to support that. So, we've done a lot on wellbeing, we've spent a lot of money on wellbeing, we've got the right people in, we've made mistakes along the way, but I think the key for me is trying to create an environment where people can honestly open up and know that they won't be judged for it.
And Dan, how do you keep yourself going? You lead your team. How do you manage? How do you keep going when it's hard?
Yeah, I see stress as sort of like it's sort of how you approach problems and your ability to sort of solve those problems, and stress can be one of those problems, right? So one of the things I do is I just talk a lot about the things that I'm doing. Like, it's kind of the opposite of when people say, keep what you're working on a secret, someone might steal your idea. But I find it holds me accountable to just everyone. So if I'm down the pub with someone, I'll tell them, I'm like, this is a new business I'm launching. I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and it's really ambitious and crazy, but I'm going to do it. And I kind of hope they'll hold me accountable, because I know next time I see them in the pub, I'm going to want to show them progress. Or if I'm speaking to someone else in business, I'm going to want to show them progress, because I'm telling them all of these things, which is just going to put more pressure on myself to actually do them and overcome the problems I'm going to face when I'm trying to achieve these things. So like, for context, we're launching kind of a new business at the moment, which is going to be managing all of the contracts that exist between drinks companies and pubs and bars in the UK. And whenever I tell people about that, it sounds crazy. They're just like, that's crazy, or why wouldn't Heineken or Bacardi or Guinness already have that? But it just sort of puts that pressure on, so that when I come across a problem, I think, I kind of just have to solve this. I can't really go back to all these people and say I couldn't solve it. So I just tell everyone about everything, and then just that's the pressure I need to do it. And then what that means is that if you can then identify each of those stresses, so like if you can say, okay, I've got financial stress, okay, how am I going to solve the financial stress? I've got stress with employees, how am I going to solve that? And I might have stress with customers, how do I solve that? I've just sort of worked on each of those individually and gotten myself to a point where I don't have those stresses anymore. So if you can manage it and think about where the stress is coming from, what the solution to those issues are, you can really sort of work through it.
Can I stay with you for the next question? Because I was just thinking that you strike me as somebody who's really, really determined, actually. And one of the questions that we've had for you specifically was, you've said that you've had to kiss 100 frogs in order to get your funding round for Bowimi. And that, I was just thinking, that must have been really tough. And clearly, apart from telling everybody you're going to do it, how do you stay optimistic and keep going when you're kissing all those frogs?
Yeah, so with funding, there's no shortcut. You just put the hours in. Like, you just have to do it. Like, the thing that everybody says is that people are investing in the CEO, so you can't offload that to someone. Someone can't do that for you. You have to go put that in. I think also, I'm speaking from a point of privilege in the sense that, like, as a man, I was a lot more comfortable to put myself in sort of jeopardizing situations and meeting very, very, very dodgy people. There was a guy who I met in Green Park in London who, when I then did more research on him later, found a news article that he'd murdered someone. So, we've been in a lot of those sorts of places late at night in hotel basements. Yeah. No, and that's what we did when we were raising money. And, we raised about 900,000 doing that. But we did just meet everyone. Like, you'd message everyone. You'd go for drinks with everyone. You would just try and, get connected with everyone, and you would just hustle whatever money you could out of wherever you could. And you know, being a man, we weren't really sort of considering the risks of that, and you don't really notice it. It's sort of like you're just doing it because it's sort of like the money's going to run out and you're going to die. So yeah, you just kind of just have to do it. And if you don't put those hours in, if you don't meet those people, a lot of the time you won't, and there's not really an excuse for it. So yeah.
I had a fundraising team who turned the no's into a game. So they were collecting the number of no's as part of the game, so that it wasn't such a setback that they had more no's than the other person. So yeah, that happens. I actually think that's quite interesting to about risk and risk taking, depending on what your personal profile is. I was going to ask you a specific question, because you've been really vocal about discrimination for women in finance. You're a real advocate for LGBTQ,
yes, many
rights.
letters.
And do you think resilience looks different for different groups in society? Like, do we need to think about resilience differently depending on who you are in order to bring about equality and equity?
I don't think so, because I think we all have our struggles. We all have our reasons why that drive a lack of resilience at times, and I think what's more important is understanding where those have come from. So women and men in business have different struggles, but they're still credible for both. In terms of the LGBT community, you know, the struggles are not worse, it's just different. So you will find anyone probably, I was born in 83, so back then at school, you know, certain words were used and it was not fashionable like it is today, and you grow up with shame, you know, and that's something that you battle when you're running a business, because that leads to a lack of confidence. Will people want to come and work for me? You know, one of my really good friends is a family law solicitor and is not as outspoken. That doesn't mean that's wrong, it's just different. And I suppose we have to build communities around ourselves where people can understand what those unique struggles are, which is why I'm a really big fan of, you know, women in finance circles, or, you know, LGBT business owner circles, where you can get together and go, oh my God, you get what you get what I'm going through.
Nurture and share, help you build some resilience.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't think it's you know, better or worse. I just think it's different, and you've really got to listen to people's journeys, irrelevant of their background. You know, they say that people from different cultural backgrounds carry trauma through generations. For 4 or 5 generations, that trauma will carry through, and that's going to, you know, shape how a business owner is and what they struggle with.
Can I maybe just add on to that slightly? What I observe is in the workplace, yes, everyone has to deal with the same sorts of stressors, deadlines, client relationships, interpersonal issues. Where I see stress and resilience can be different for different people is when you feel like you are alone or you feel like you're othered in the workplace. That can be incredibly draining and incredibly isolating. And we all just have one tank to pull from, right? When we're going to work, when we're going home, when we're when we're living our lives, when we're being in relationships with people. And what I see in sort of women in engineering, for example, or anyone who feels that they are somehow not connected and supported by community at work, the experience is much more draining for them. And those people often tend to have higher degrees of stress or burnout.
In fact, that might lead me on to my question for you. Just, so you have looked at the science behind some of this about resilience and how do you build resilience, and you mentioned earlier about replenishing, you know, what power tools do you have that you can recommend for people to build their resilience?
Yeah, cool. I love a power tool. And my sort of toolkit is one toolkit. It works for it. You know, it resonates with some. It doesn't with others. There's so much out there. So you know, do your own research and find the thing that works for you. Alongside Thrive, I'm a senior associate for a consultancy called Kintler. We use Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model to teach people the brain's response to stress and how to regulate stress through that knowledge. There's three main buckets of regulators. The first is a sort of bottom-up approach, using your physical body essentially to send signals to the brain that you're safe. So that can be things like walking, it can be things like taking a break, having a cup of coffee, physical rest. But one thing that I use there a lot in my personal practice is breath work, particularly box breathing or square breathing. It's an equal part breath practice that a lot of people use to regulate stress, maintain focus, and obtain a sort of sense of calm in stressful situations. The two other buckets is top-down. So top-down is kind of using your brain to cultivate a growth mindset and sort of learning around stress. Things like, you know, talking to yourself, talking yourself through stress, or making a plan or having a strategy, which I heard a lot in your approach to it. You know, focusing on the bigger goals, focusing on the purpose, zooming out. For me, there's an exercise called Circle of Control, which is very simple, but it's something, again, that I use a lot with my coaching clients. Draw a big circle on a piece of paper. On the outside of the circle, write everything about the sort of situation that you cannot control. And on the inside of the circle, write everything about the situation you can control. And then pick one of those things and go and do it. Simple, but very effective. And the third is relational, so being in meaningful community with other people. And that you can establish through just short, meaningful interactions with the people around you. And that could be, you know, a 2-minute conversation with someone each day about something that isn't work.
Thank you. I'm a bit conscious of the time, and I might move to questions. I wonder if, I think we have Rachel Dern. Hi, Rachel. Is that right? Can I just introduce you and say you're a senior lecturer in Entrepreneurship at Goldsmiths University, and you've got a new book out called The Resilient Entrepreneur. How convenient is that you're in the audience? Do you want to say something?
Sure. So I have a book coming out over the next few months called The Resilient Entrepreneur, From Crisis to Enlightenment, and it's based on my research and my work with entrepreneurs over the last 20 years and over the last 15 years more specifically in regards to looking at entrepreneurs in crisis and the different strategies they use. And maybe just to define resilience very briefly, and I think we've been alluding to it the whole time, it's about our ability on an individual level as human beings to be able to resist the ill effects of stress or to recover from stress relatively easily, relatively quickly. And as academics, we tend to look at stress or look at resilience from 3 perspectives: as an outcome, as a trait, or as a process. And I tend to subscribe to the third view. Most of my research is there, looking at resilience as a process. So how can we and how can entrepreneurs as individuals develop it, strengthen it as a capability, as a muscle? And so the research that I look at and depict in the book follows entrepreneurs through difficult situations, highlights their stories, and talks about the different forms of internal and external adjustments that they make. So internally, in terms of what goes on in their head, how can they shift their focus or their attention during times of difficulty to elicit those positive emotions, so that we know in terms of maintaining healthy functioning, psychological and physical functioning, that being able also to elicit positive emotions is really key. They help to diminish negative emotions and process those negative emotions. So things that entrepreneurs can do to shift their focus to elicit those positive emotions during times of difficulty. Also, it's about how entrepreneurs reframe certain situations, not to just see them as threats, but potentially as opportunities or as challenges. And it's also about the adjustments that they make to their external environment. So we know resources are important in times of crisis. Resources being those things that we value or that help us acquire the things that we value, right? Like our jobs and our homes and our networks, our financial reserves, our health, and so on. So entrepreneurs in crisis who are resilient are those people who are continually optimizing their resources. So they're leaning into their existing networks. They're also continually developing and investing in new resources, so making new connections. And they're also able to modify their existing environment. So they're looking for ways in which to anticipate situations that might come up where negative emotions might be elicited, and how they can diminish those and elicit positive emotions in turn. And I think there were some examples of that as well.
Can I ask you,
Yeah.
are entrepreneurs special? Are they different to other people? Are they more resilient, do you think? What is it about, what drives, how, are they the same or different? What are you seeing in your research?
Well, my research is mainly focused on entrepreneurs specifically. So I can say, from a trait perspective, if we think of resilience as something that we do or don't possess, as something that we're abundant in or deficient in, then the qualities that come up when we think of resilience are high levels of self-esteem, self-efficacy, optimism, and I think entrepreneurs do embody a lot of these traits, but I don't think looking at traits in and of themselves or alone is very helpful. I also think we have to think about resilience as a state, as something we can or cannot achieve through positive adaptation, how we bounce back or bounce forward, which is what we refer to as post-traumatic growth. So some people after a crisis are even better off than before, right? They discover new interests, new skills, new capabilities, and so on. But I think what I'm seeing is that we all have the capability to be resilient, and I think we can all learn from entrepreneurs in crisis as to how to strengthen our own resilience through a number of different strategies. And as an aside, there's also things they do that make them more vulnerable and less resilient, and those are some of the things that I talk about in the book as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for just stepping in and speaking. We don't have time for questions, but I just wanted to say thank you to our amazing panel. I think I've learned a lot. I'm definitely drawing that circle tomorrow.
Simple but effective.
And a few of the other tips that you've come up with. So I just want to thank our panel. Thank you very much for